Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my VCT Americas player rankings. Going to go through every team in VCT Americas and rank every player within their role. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Really helps me out. Trying to work up to like 1.5 thousand subscribers. We're at like 1.2k right now, so if you're interested, go do that. Also, go follow me on Twitter where I'll be updating the series throughout the year. I'll do like a update video at some point throughout the season as well. But for now, we are just going to be doing it on Twitter throughout like during kickoff and during the regular season matches. Other than that, I don't really got too much for this intro. Uh, it's pretty self-explanatory. Same series as last year that I did. So yeah, let's hop right into it. So I'm not going to make a big fancy graphic for this because I already have a spreadsheet that I use for myself and I post on Twitter. So we'll start with my Duelist rankings, where I have Ospas number 1. And now I've seen some people talking in the off season about just like general like rankings of players, and I feel like Ospas generally hasn't been like up there in that like top tier where it feels like he should have been. Like he was the top performer in every split for Americas last year. He was, I'm assuming, one of the top performing players at Champs last year. And he's coming into a team that I think he is going to enjoy playing on more, and he's going to feel maybe more confident in his teammates and everything like that. So I don't know. Aspas is the GOAT of Valorant. If you disagree, you are wrong. It's just a fact. And like, yeah, I mean, he's just going to be really good on this team, and he is the best duelist player in Americas, if not the world. It's kind of close when you get into like texture and maybe, I mean, not Durka really. I think Durka would probably be like just like in between these two tiers. Oh yeah, also, I forgot to mention the colors here. They show like the tiers of each player. So like Aspas Giacomo Zekin is tier 1, then Zekin, Mata, Cryo, Oxy is tier 2, and so on. Yeah, then Giacomo I have over Zekin. I think they're very similar players in a way. They both can play all three main duelists. I don't think either one can really play Yoru, which actually is also like a big thing with Aspas, is that he can play all three duelists very well. Um, but I do think what sets them apart is actually Giacomo's Jet, which I think is his worst of his three duelists, but I do think it is much better than Zekin's. Not that Zekin's Jet is bad by any means. Not that even if it's like average. It's very good, but I think Giacomo's is close to that like elite tier, especially when you have him like obviously his op isn't the greatest. I still think it's better than Zekin's, but like when you get into like the jet knives and like a lot of like the utility usage with the smokes and the dash and everything, I do think he is a little bit better. And I also just prefer Giacomo's style over Zekin. I think he's a little bit more of like a pacey duelist and everything like that, which I do kind of prefer, just the speed. And then yeah, Zekin also very good. Everybody kind of knows these top three guys very well, so I don't really want to spend a ton of time on them. Then we have Kesnet at number 4. One of the top performing players of last year on crew. Uh, has been one of the top performing players the last couple years. He's never really broken into that like top tier. I think he did at one point last year for me, and then immediately went back down. So I mean, he's really good. When he's on, he actually might be like top 2, top 1 in Americas, like when he's playing at his absolute best. But that doesn't come all the time, and there are definitely lows within his gameplay. Then Mata I have at number 5, a rookie who I think is super good. I think he will be very similar to Zekin as a player in terms of like the season wide kind of scope. I don't think he's going to be better than Zekin by any means. I'm not going to predict that because Zekin has been so consistent over the past like 3 years. So obviously you can't like predict a rookie to come in and do that exact thing. But yeah, I mean he can play all three main duelists. He can even play Yoru better than Zekin can. Um, and I do think that his style, in terms of just like the selfless kind of entry style and being really good at that, is definitely a strength of his and something that again can really compare very well to some of the top duelists like Zekin, and I do think Durka as well is another guy that kind of plays like that. Maybe Buzz, players like that. I think Buzz is like the peak of what that like selfless entry style means, and like kind of just creating space and everything for his team. But I do think yeah, Mata's just really good. Everybody saw that during the offseason. And yeah. Then I have Cryo at number 6. I think some people might have Asuna as 100 Thieves Duelist player, technically because he plays probably just percentage wise on the maps more Duelist. He's like, let's see, Abyss would be Cryo, Bind would be Asuna, Fracture would be Asuna, Haven would be either or, probably Cryo, I would assume. Lotus would be Asuna, sorry. Uh, Pearl would be Cryo, and Split would be Asuna. So it'd be kind of a good split. But if I were to have Cryo not as the main duelist player, then he would be the smokes player. And then what the fuck do I put Xander as? So I'm just gonna leave Cryo at 6 here. I mean, maybe I would put Boostio as like, I don't even know. Man. It's weird. That the roles on that team are weird, but they're also good. Like they work, so I don't really have any issue with them. Obviously not the most flexible duelist player, but when you put him on even like just some of the smokes agents like Astra and Omen specifically, I think he's really good at those as well. Uh, I think he is definitely lower on this list because he doesn't have that other duelist flexibility, and he needs a player like an Asuna to kind of pair up with him and be able to play the Rays and Neon for the team. But regardless, I do think he is one of the best players in Americas. And I do think if you were rating overall players in Americas, I would actually rate Cryo. Actually, then I would probably want to change that. I would probably have Cryo over Mata then, if I were ranking them as overall players, which is what the point of this is. So I rank them based on what they are asked to do within their team. So flexibility does matter, but also if they aren't ever asked to be flexible, then it's not necessary. That I'm not going to do that. So Cryo, I'm going to put above Mata. Then Oxy, I have at number 7. I feel like this is underrating Oxy, having him as a technically below average duelist in Americas, if you think about it. But like the tiers, I do think you can kind of order in any way that you want, and I wouldn't be too mad. Oxy has had some absurd peaks, but I do think at times he can kind of overheat and do too much, and I do think that is kind of playing into the way that C9 kind of plays a little bit too aggressively sometimes and like can kind of throw away some of these late games and kind of choke stuff. As well as like, yeah, I think they get a little bit chaotic too much. I had another point. Yeah, like the teammates thing where like he would drop a billion kills and his teammates wouldn't really do anything. Like I think some of that's on him. I think that's sometimes like when you see duelist players doing that, I do think a lot of that does come down to the duelist player. Obviously, it depends on the situation. Like May on DFM last year was an obvious example of like the opposite of that, where he is absolutely carrying that team. But yeah, Oxy really good. I think you could argue that he's up to 4th in terms of the best duelist players, but I wouldn't put him even in the conversation with Aspas, Giacomo, and Zekin, which I think people have kind of calmed down from the beginning of the year from doing. Then Demon 1, I have at number 8 in a new tier. I do think some people are not going to like him being in the same tier as Icy. Uh, I'm going to leave him here just because I do think he will at least be playing Jet for this team. Maybe Tex is going to be playing full-time Duelist, and uh, Demon 1's going to be playing full-time Smokes. I will change that in my player rankings that I mentioned at the beginning. But like when it actually is proven that it is different. But yeah, I don't know. He was playing Duelist in like the off-season events for this team, the Rays. It just wasn't good. He is being asked to play Rays, which is kind of why he's a little bit lower. And I do think he is kind of worse on those smokes rolls than Cryo, specifically because he cannot play the Omen as well as Cryo does. So I don't know. He's interesting. He's an interesting player because like he could shoot up this ranking to like this top tier because that's where I had him to start last year. Um, but yeah, he's just he's a weird player. So I like Demon One. I believe in Demon One, but I have him rated number 8 right now, just because we don't really know what we're gonna see from him. I do think as a smokes player, he would be rated higher than number 8 in Americas, though, for me. Then Icy at number 9. Uh, I really like Icy, like more than most people do. Now, do I think he's gonna come into EG and be even like 90% of what Giacomo was? Like, I think in the 90% seems like a lot for most people when I say that, but it really isn't. Like, you'd want like the difference between like Giacomo or I guess Zekin and Mata. Like Mata would give you 90, probably like between 90 and 95% of what Zekin does, but just obviously that a little bit worse. Icy, I don't think he's gonna be a good replacement for Giacomo and EG. I think that team is gonna kind of wildly change, be a lot slower in pace and everything like that. But I do think he is still a very solid duelist. On G2 last year, he was really good. He was kind of heating up towards the end of the season. I think when you get into the games like versus Sentinels during playoffs, I thought he played amazing during that game. He went like 41 and 26 as an overall stat line. So I think he's a solid duelist player that will be kind of middle of the pack for this team. I mean, obviously he's number 9 here, but like he's not going to win you games, but he won't lose you games either. Then DG's in. Been out of tier 1 for a little bit, so I'm going to rank him a little bit lower just because not exactly sure. When he was in tier 1, he was kind of that jet chamber 2 trick, I'd say. But overall, like, he was really good on that jet. His mechanics looked really good. So, like, if it's close to what he was, I think he'd probably be the top of this tier. If not, then I think he's more at number 10. And I'm going to try to rank these players a little bit more at their floor rather than their ceiling. Then Silence, I think playing that Sentinel and the Duelist for 2 game, I think he looked pretty good, even though he's number 11 here. Like, I do think all these players are good players. That's been one thing with this offseason for me that's been kind of hard, is like being able to criticize teams when I like the players that they picked up in like 95% of cases. Obviously 2 game didn't pick up Silence necessarily, but he's a really good opper, really good mechanically. I believe he only played Jet and Sentinel. Silence. There we go. Yeah, it was like Jet, ISO, Sentinel, stuff like that. He did play a little bit of Raze actually. Where was this? Oh, on Bind. Why? Oh, because then you would have to play Viper. I see. But yeah, he's really good. I like him. I think he's gonna be good. He just hasn't proven enough to do that. And then I think same thing with Havoc on Duelist. He's actually looked pretty solid. But I don't believe in him as much on this role as I would have believed in him on Sentinel. So overall, those are my Duelist rankings for Americas. Now we're moving on to Flash Initiator. All right, now into my Flash Initiator rankings. This will be just what you would typically categorize as your flex player. But I kind of wanted to make it more Flash Initiator because of players like Ethan uh, and some other regions and stuff like that. It's just, I guess, like, I mean, Asuna plays a little bit of Duelist. Like, there's other guys in here that play other stuff, maybe Art Scene. But yeah. So we'll start at the top again with Jonah P and Ethan. I think that's most people's top 2. Maybe some people would have Jonah in a tier of his own or Ethan above Jonah. It really doesn't matter to me. I think they're both incredible support players, especially when you put them on the KO. I think Ethan's a little bit better at the Sky and the Breach. Jonah's a little bit more flexible across the board, and is still really good at everything. So yeah, just two elite players, no doubt about it. Even though Ethan had kind of a worse year on NRG last year, I do think individually he is still very, very good. Then we have the second tier here with Asuna and Mizuno. Asuna, I mean, I talked about him in so many videos about being super overrated, or not overrated, overhated, where everybody seems to, every chance they get, Asuna made this stupid decision. Asuna, bad player when he has one bad game. It's more than usual with other players. Like you'll see other players have bad games, and it's like, yeah, he had a bad game, like whatever. Like Zekin, uh, per se. I think he was with split two last year. I mean, the whole Sen team, I guess, was split two last year. That was kind of like a huge thing when I don't know, people were calling for Austin's job after kickoff because he calmed something a lot and frantically, which was interesting. But he's one of the best race players in Americas. And I think his KO and his breach, I think specifically, are two of his better agents. I think even though he's maybe a little bit faster and more of like that kind of second entry type player, more so than Jonah and Ethan are, and maybe a little bit too aggressive at times, which is why I think his Sky is a little bit worse. I do think he's really good. I think he can play probably like Fade. He's played a little bit of Yoru in the past. I don't think that's his best agent, but he can play the Neon as well, which he's really, really good at. What other agents are there that he plays? I forget what he plays. Something else, I'm pretty sure. Gecko. Yep, there it is. His Gecko's really good too. So yeah, he's just a great player and one of the biggest pieces of this 100 Thieves team, and a reason he's been there for so long is because he's that good. Then we have Mazzino, who, wait, isn't he supposed to be? Hold on, I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be the flex player or the smokes player for this team. I don't know why I have him in here. No, he's playing flex. Never mind. I'm an idiot. Yeah, I originally had him as the smokes player, and then I remembered Melzer's coming in. Okay, that's what it was. So he is going to be playing the flash initiator here. I mean, he's probably the most flexible player out of these top four. He can play pretty much everything you ask him to. Like he plays Sage really well. Harbor is his best agent. He can play all the smokes agents. He can play KO. He can play Sky. He can play Breach. He can play Deadlock. He has a bunch of Viper games in here. I don't think that's really his thing. I think he can play Sova really well. Fade's probably decent for him. He's played it a little bit here, and it doesn't. The stats don't look too bad, and it seems like an agent that he can play. Again, I haven't seen him play it a ton, so maybe I'm crazy for saying that. But overall, I do think he's going to be a great addition to this crew team. He was really good last year. I don't think he was elite by any means. I do think there is some room for like maybe what's the phrase called? Regression to the mean. That's what it's called. Where he kind of maybe goes back to where he was like kind of earlier in his career or somewhere in between that and settles in maybe as like a fifth, sixth, maybe seventh ranked flex player in Americas or something like that. I just think right now I'm gonna rank him number 4. I'm not the biggest Mazzino guy though. I will say that just because like the decision making at times is really bad, and there's some out of the game stuff that isn't a great thing with him. But we'll move on to Artsine, who is going to be playing the Flash Initiator this year for MIBR. He played a lot of Duelist last year, some Sentinel as well. His Sentinel looked really good. I thought he was going to be playing that for this team. But when you get Zenom and Cortasia, who I think are two really good tier 2 prospects, I think you got to put one of them on Senti and one of them on Smokes or something like that, which is what they did. So initially, I wasn't huge on the move, but Cortasia's Sentinel looked really good, which we'll get to in a little bit. And Artsine's Flash Initiator looked pretty good. He played a little bit of Deadlock as well. So he does seem pretty flexible. He can play the Sentinel. He can play the Flashes as well. I believe he played some Flex before he played Duelist as well. That might be completely wrong. But overall, I really like Artsine as a player. Jesus. But I don't know. I'm not huge on him as a Duelist player, so I don't think he'll be playing any of that for this team, hopefully. But yeah, I don't know. I think he's really good. As I've said many, many, many times. Then a tank. I think he's kind of he should be a similar archetype to Asuna, but apparently, again, I didn't watch this Riot 1 Invitational, so maybe he was playing full-time Senti for them. No, he was playing the Flash Initiator here, so that's pretty normal overall. Let me just make sure. He only played initiator at this event, so I don't know. He was a really good duelist player last year. Maybe not really good. He was a good duelist player last year in EMEA, and I think he can play the flashes. I just think he's a worse version of Asuna that maybe is a little bit less pacey, um, in term like less quick on the decision making and stuff like that. Kind of like what I mentioned about Jogamo, how I think like I kind of prefer the players that are a little bit quicker. Uh, I wouldn't say like the flicky, flashy aim necessarily, but just like that kind of speed in terms of being able to like, all right, flick to this next angle kind of thing, and not like it's harder to catch them off guard completely and like get no damage taken from them. I guess is kind of what my point is, or maybe they'll be able to get a piece of util off just before they die or something like that. Just faster reaction time, I guess, is what I'm saying. And just more willingness to go in as well as a duelist player, which I guess the tank isn't really going to be doing on this team because they have Tex and Demon 1. So I don't get what the point of picking him up over maybe a Nismo, maybe a like giving Flya a shot or something. Picking like I don't know, man. They could have done so much differently than the tank. I don't get why they had to spend the money to import him, or maybe pick up some Latam talent for your Latam org. I don't know. Lev's off season was a weird one. It wasn't necessarily bad. It was just weird. Then we have number 7, Zelsis, who is another one of these super flexible players. He can play some smokes, mainly just the Brimstone. I think he's really good at the Brimstone, but like the rest of it, like when he played the Omen in those off-season events, it was kind of bad. But like he can play KO, Killjoy, Breach. Did he play Breach for this team? I don't remember, but I do think he can do that. Viper, Sage, Brim, uh, Cypher. I think I already mentioned Killjoy. Just he can play a bunch of different like Sentinel, smokes, and like I mean just Brimstone, I guess, for smokes. But I guess Viper would also count technically. But Sentinel, smokes, and initiator stuff for these teams. Specifically, the flash initiator, I do think for him though. I wouldn't really venture into like the Sova and the fade stuff with him. I don't think that's really his kind of style. Uh, but I do have him ranked a little bit higher than maybe he should be strictly as an individual, just because we know how valuable this guy is in terms of the comms and the vibes for this team. Just keeps that general mood a little bit higher in the team, and I do think that is very valuable. So I maybe bumped him up a spot or two to keep him kind of maybe in terms of value where he should be. Then number 8, I have Zeppa, who has been getting a lot of hate from the community recently, and it's kind of something that I've been on for a while in terms of like I think he's just got to go. Uh, like whenever he plays well, it's always in these off-season events. It sucks people back in. It's like, oh, he's gonna be so good, and then he's not. Like he's just fine at best. Like there's some games from Zeppa that are really bad that he'll like straight up lose his team maps. Like I think was it Icebox versus Lev? It was this game, right? Yeah, map 1 Icebox versus Lev, where he's just I don't know, he multiple times just like made an awful decision, kind of lost them around. They ended up losing that 13-7. Specifically on the defensive side where they lost 9-3. So I'm not a Zeppa guy at all, kind of similar to Mazzino. Uh, and just the kind of Zeppa hate train, I guess, I've been on for a while before it even existed, I guess. Again, I don't think he's bad at all. I think he could be a tier 1 player, maybe on a different team, getting to play more of that raise. But like when you ask him to play the solo initiator Sky, or I mean, like specifically the new Sky, like no regen flashes, or like the Breach, or Gecko, or Fade, like it's just not as good. His KO's good, his raise is good, and his Sky was good. when he was able to just spam the flashes, kind of. So I don't know. He's okay. Not my favorite player though, to be honest. Then we have Vinny, who I thought was really good in tier 2 last year, but he's going to be IGLing for this team. So I don't really know where his individual skill is going to lie. Like, wait, what was it? This one where he went? Yeah, he went 13 and 26 against the 7 in this offseason tournament. Lad ended up winning, but it was just kind of like a bro. Let's pick it up a little bit, which statistically he did pick it up the rest of the tournament, but it was just kind of funny seeing that. Um, yeah, I think he'll be solid, but I could see him also kind of just not being great as an individual and being a decent caller. I've never seen him call before because he didn't do it in tier 2, so it's just kind of a weird thing with him. Is just a big unknown. Then I have Gobera as well. I think he was a good duelist player when I've watched him. I did not watch his games with 2G in this Tixinha. I have no idea how to pronounce that. Somebody can correct me in the comments, please, man. But I didn't watch their games in this tournament. Was Price was there? I have no idea. Um, but yeah, I think he's good. I don't think he's going to be better than Spike, but I do think he'll be good. Like I think Spike would probably be in this 5 to 8 tier if I were to be ranking him. Then Nature, the IGL kind of debuff here. He'll be he'll be good in some maps, but overall just not the best individual. And then Rafa, kind of same thing, but I don't know. He's not a good individual player. I think I have more confidence that he'll be a better caller than Vinny, but those won't be factored into these rankings. I have a different IGLing list, so stay tuned for that. All right, and now onto the scan initiators. These are more of the players playing that Sova, the Fade, maybe the Sky sometimes, depending on the map. Some of these guys also play Breach, depending on like who their like flex flashes player is. But yeah, just a bunch of good players here. We'll start with EU, who might actually be my hottest take on this list being this high. I think most people would have like a Trent above him. At least at this point, Trent probably. Um, I wouldn't really know who else you'd put above him. Maybe some people think Calm is better, which is just false. Maybe some people would have had Heat over him last year, which again is just wrong. Uh, but just decision making wise, mechanically, I think both in both areas, I do think he is the best initiator player in Americas. I think when you get into like the util and stuff, it's more like even with Trent. But I think he's pretty clearly better than Trent. But I do think Trent is like one of the elite initiator players in the world as well. So I have to have them both in this tier for that reason. Everybody knows about Trent. Obviously, he's probably the most popular player in these tiers, maybe outside of John QT, because he's an IGL. That'll mean he's lower, but still, he's very, very good. Then we'll get into the second tier with Verno, rookie. I do think he will kind of prove to be in that top tier, but he hasn't played in an official VCT match, so I can't rank him there quite yet, but I do think he is very good. Then onto Calm, who I think is just kind of locked in this like 4, maybe 5 slot. Maybe Cowanzine or Derek passes him up throughout the year, but I really don't see him really moving too much in my opinion. He's been pretty consistent over the past year or two. Um, I think at the beginning of the year he was kind of being overhated in terms of how bad he was playing. I really didn't notice him necessarily being bad, but um, yeah, I mean everybody knows Calm again at this point. Like one of the better players in NA, he should have a franchise slot for at least another year, even if he plays badly this year. I think the team will be like, okay, let get him back to where he's been. He's been that good. So, um, yeah, I really like Calm. He can. I mean, the one thing with Calm is like he isn't the most flexible player. When the fuck did he play Yoru? Oh, Spotlight Series. Okay, that makes more sense. Um, but like, yeah, he plays Sova, Fade, and Viper pretty much. He can play a little bit of the Sentinel stuff that he did last year. But other than that, I wouldn't really put him on anything else. You'd hope that maybe he can develop and become maybe more of a Sky, like a great Sky player or a Breach player or something like that. Maybe like some smokes as well. I think that could be good for him to develop into Gecko as well. Um, yeah, there's definitely more for him to be able to play, but right now, I think with this Lev team, I think he plays enough to for them to be really good. Then Cowanzine didn't have the best year last year, in my opinion. I thought he started the year off really well, especially at kickoff. I thought he was amazing there. He showed his absurd mechanical talent. Now, Madrid was kind of but I do think a lot of this was kind of symptoms of just running a weird comp pretty much all year and not being on the best team. So I do think if Loud is to be better, a lot of that will be down to Cowanzine kind of carrying this team a little bit. I think he is probably up with like Trent and EU in terms of mechanically gifted initiator players. I don't think he's necessarily like um, better than them, but I do think he's kind of in that conversation. It's just the util, the decision making, that kind of stuff can be a little bit better. And then Derek, who honestly I just think is just a slightly worse version of EU, but that's still really good, and I still really like Derek. He should like he's a player that you can win tournaments with, especially if he goes on those absurdly hot runs like he did at kickoff, like he did at NALCQ in 2022. I mean, even champs he played really well. Um, but yeah, he's kind of a streaky player a little bit, but he's not when he's playing poorly. He doesn't really have that many terrible games. I think his game against C9 this year uh, in Americas, I think that's what it was. In America, I think they played C9 just the one time, right? Yeah. So their game against C9 this year, I think, was probably his worst game. Um, but another player that like maybe you'd hope he could be a little bit more flexible playing like dude, his VLR, he has 282 games of Sova on his career, and the next closest is 40 games of Fade, which I think actually might be a better agent for him. But he can also play Breach to a pretty high level. But then once you get into like Sky and Gecko, it's like with him. So you'd hope he can maybe develop at least one of those during the offseason. Probably the Gecko, you would hope. Then MW, who actually looking at this now, I'm going to actually move up into this tier with Derek and Cowanzine. I think he's a really good initiator player. I think I was really critical of them swapping him back to Duelist last year. It seemed like he kind of had that really good off season, or not off season, this really good season of playing like the Sky mainly. I think he played a little bit of Sova, which he was actually pretty good at as well. Um, just playing those and playing really well, and then swapped him back to Duelist for seemingly no reason. He probably just was like, I'm playing Duelist and I'm building this roster last year, and that didn't go very well for them. But back on Initiator, back playing that more like less selfish role, which I do think he plays Duelist a little bit selfishly, kind of like your um, Ospas kind of archetype, I guess. Um, but yeah, just playing the Initiator here, he's very good at it, and I think he will end up being higher than this. I think he'll probably be in this 5 to 6 range once you get into the season here, just because I think he'll prove to be that really good Initiator player, but I can't put him that high, especially after the year he had last year. Now, for Duelist rankings, I probably would have had him like, oops, did not mean. Smokes leak, I'm almost to it anyway, so I don't really care. I'd probably have him above Icy here at like number 9. I'd have him slightly higher than DG just because I think his end of year last year was really good. Then Zap, Noswar, and John Cutie. I think all these players are in a similar conversation where I think they're all 3 really good individual players. John probably the worst, just because in terms of like the whole initiator scope, his utility usage is not as good as the other 2. Like not even close, I don't think. Um, but 3 really good individual players. It's just their IGLs, so I don't know how consistent they will be. Because I do think that is kind of one thing with IGLs where you can know somebody is a good individual player when they're not IGLing, but when they are, it kind of is less consistent. Then Adverso and Mitch, kind of two players that aren't as great individual players and are IGLs, can have some good moments, I think, with these two guys, but overall just not the best. And then also Mitch, specifically being at the bottom, he doesn't play Sova, so I don't know what this team is going to be able to do next year, but hopefully, or I get not next year, this upcoming year now, uh, hopefully he'll be able to learn that. And now onto my smokes rankings, where we're going to start with Bang at the top. I do think he will end the year in a tier with maybe Sam, Xander, Valen, and probably somebody else. Like I think this top tier will be more than just Bang at the end of the year. But for right now, I do think Bang is pretty clearly better than all of the other options right now. Putting him in a tier of his own at number one. Do I think he's necessarily in a tier even with the top smokes players from other regions? No. I think he's really good. And I'd say he's probably a great smokes player. But when you get into like the elite of the elite, I have my doubts about Bang in terms of being the like player that can form in these big games. Uh, he did it a lot more on 100 Thieves last year, and that is progress. And I hope to see that uh, keep progressing more with Sentinels because he is one of my favorite players. But mechanically, I think he like in terms of just raw aim, he is actually the best on this list. Like I fully believe that. Um, Som, I think, is going to be somebody that people point to a lot, but I don't think in actual matches it shows up as much. Like when you're watching him in ranked, he looks unreal. But matches, I don't think the mechanics necessarily show up for Som as much as maybe other players. I think he's just more of like a consistent, solid player. But yeah, Bang is great. You'd hope he can kind of gel with the Sentinels team, be that amazing side anchor that he's been for 100 Thieves for a while. And yeah, he's just really good. Then Som, I have number two. I mean, he was the best smokes player in NA in 2023. In 2024, he kind of took the front end of the year off. And I really don't think he was good when he came back. Obviously, in the offseason, I think he played a lot better. And I think he will be a lot better coming into this year. But that's why I don't have him in that top tier. I have him just below it. I think after kickoff, I will have him in this top tier with Bang, maybe even ahead of Bang. But for right now, I really can't justify doing it just because of how poorly he played with NRG in 2024. Then I have Valen, who is the best fragging IGL in the world. I really don't think it's close. Like in terms of true IGLs, like obviously if you count Forsaken as an IGL, of course Valen's going to be behind him. Right, yeah. I mean, maybe Safe ends up being that for Vitality or something like that. But for right now, I think Valen's proven to be that. I don't think he'll get out of this tier, but yeah, I just think again, like the IGL kind of debuff makes his performances a little bit less consistent. But I do think he's still really, really. Oh wow, I did not mean to scroll there. I'm just making sure I spelled his name right. Okay, yeah, I did. It just looks weird like this. I don't know why. But yeah, he's very, very good. And I think everybody knows how good Valen is. And then Xander, same thing. Coming up from tier two, I do think he is maybe a tad overrated. Like, I do think Bang is very clearly better than him. And I think 100 Thieves, at best, made a side grade to Xander over Bang. But overall, I think he's just really good. He played really well for M80 last year, was one of the big reasons why that team was good, or was as good as it was. And could potentially add quite a bit to the 100 Thieves calling over Bang, which maybe makes him a little bit more valuable for that team. Then number 5, Superman. I think very similar player to Derek, but in the smokes role, just pretty inconsistent. But when he pops off, he pops off. And I think his bad performances were not quite as bad for EG last year. I think a lot of that has to do with Potter. But I like Superman a lot more than I did kind of coming into the season. Just because of Potter. I think Potter is a huge piece of this team. If I was doing coach rankings, she would be number one, not a doubt in my mind. But yeah, he's really good. I don't think he's quite consistent enough to be in that top 2 tiers, but maybe he gets more consistent this year, and maybe he makes it into those tiers. I'm not exactly sure. Then Vic, who I think is going to be a pretty similar player to Superman this year, maybe have a similar year to what Superman did last year. Um, just a really good mechanical smokes player. Uh, he can play some Sentinel as well. He has in the past. He's played some Flex as well, which I don't think he's quite as good at. He can kind of just use his read on the game. I think he's a similar player to Marved as well. Actually, I think that's one of the bigger comps that I've given him. Um, and yeah, I think he's just really solid. I think he'll probably be the second best player on the C9 roster, just because I don't like the rest of it. Then onto number 7, I have King, who a lot of people have deemed the best fragging IGL in the world, when Valen in his same region is just straight up better. Like, I mean, obviously, I mentioned Forsaken earlier. I think Nats maybe could be in there this year. Boo could be up there as well. He's just a little bit less consistent. As I said, safe. Um, Munchkin, I think, might actually be better than everybody else. But he, again, is a little bit less consistent than Valen, I think. So that's 50-50 between Munchkin and Valen. But King, I do think is a very good fragging IGO. I don't know how I feel necessarily about him like being better than the other guys here. I think he should be a flex player as well. I think he's better on that role than Smokes. I would probably have him in terms of a flashes player. I would have him above Artzine, probably, but in a tier of his own. So I think he's pretty clearly a tier above these guys, but I don't think he is even in the conversation with Mizuno and Asuna necessarily. But yeah, I think King's really good. Obviously, I think a lot of people do. His IGLing improved a lot last year. I think he kind of took a little bit of a dip in terms of individual form because of that, but he's still just as good, pretty much. Then Khalil, I think we're getting into kind of a consistent theme here with some of these smokes players, just not consistent at all. Again, just a player that will have a game or two every year where he goes absolutely insane. Now, the rest of the games, he's a little bit worse. I think his lows are a little bit lower than your Supermans, your Vicks, everybody like that. But he's still pretty good, and he's probably my favorite Brazilian smokes player here, just at this current moment. Then Pancada, I think he played better in the offseason, but man, I did not like his performances at the end of 2024. Very similar to Sam. I just don't have as much faith in Pancada as I do Sam, as you can tell here. But I do think he can get back, maybe be that like 4th to 5th best smokes player. I don't think he'll get back to maybe that. I think it was Reykjavik form when he was really good. I don't remember which tournament it was. It was either Champs or Reykjavik on Loud when he was absurdly good. But he'll still be like a really good smokes player, I think. I think that's definitely possible. We just need to see it first. Then Zenom, who actually might be my favorite Brazilian smokes player that I have the most faith in to kind of fix stuff. He wasn't, I mean, I thought he was really good in tier 2 when I watched him. But for the MIBR offseason tournament that they played, he did not play well. Just straight up. He just mechanically, I guess maybe not mechanically. He just wasn't winning as many fights as he was in tier 2, so you hope that kind of gets back after his first match with this, or matches with this MIBR team. I do believe that they hadn't practiced a ton going into that tournament, so maybe you can give him a bit of a pass. Maybe he had to focus more on his utility usage and stuff like that. But still, I think he has a lot of potential in the smokes role. You just gotta let it play out and see it. And then Melzer, who I'm a little bit lower on. I'm not huge on him. And then LZ, I think is the worst of like the tier 2 prospects, but I don't think he's bad. I think he will end the year probably a little bit higher than this because I do like him. But again, as I've said with quite a bit of these rookies, we just have to see it first. And then the Sentinel list here, this last up for in terms of roles, I do have an IGL list after this. I think this one I can kind of speed through a little bit more, especially this this bottom four. I think it's pretty clear how good those players are. But I think Leaf is pretty clearly the best Sentinel in Americas. I would have less over him, obviously, if he was playing here, but he's being a trader and going to EMEA, sadly. So I'm gonna have Leaf number one pretty clearly. Then Shy, Narrate, Tex in tier two. I think Shy has been one of the most underrated players in Americas for at least 3 years now. He's played really well for this crew team. I think, yeah, crew on the Sentinel role again for that amount of time. I don't think he gets enough attention for it. Like, I think Narrate, if he plays at all well, will get more attention for it. Tex probably will as well. But yeah, I think Shy is really good. I think he's just more of a like your typical Sentinel player type that you expect from maybe players like Moose, like the players that have been playing Sentinel since the beginning of the game. But I do think he is a little bit more mechanically talented than those players necessarily. Then Narrate and Tex, I think, are pretty similar. Just two players that maybe should be playing other roles, but I think when you put them on the Sentinel role and just tell them, hey, go kill this guy, especially with Tex, I do think he is actually, I'm gonna have Tex over Narrate in terms of Sentinel. I think if Narrate was playing Flex or Initiator, I would say I think Narrate's a better overall player than Tex. But I think in terms of just experience on the Sentinel role and stuff like that, oh, excuse me. I think Tex has more experience on that role, playing Chamber in 2022 as well as all of last year in terms of Sentinel, and I think he is better in terms of that style of, hey, let's just go fucking kill that guy, instead of maybe Narrate, who's better at kind of following up and trading people and that kind of stuff. Then number 5, I have Ye, who I think will be really good in this EG team. I think this kind of tier here is a bunch of players swapping to the Sentinel role, 4 players that I think are really, really good and I think will work out. I just have to see it first. And I think number 1 with that is Ye. Hasn't had the best couple years before this, but looked pretty decent when he was playing for EG. You'd like to see that team get a little bit more practice with Icy now. And I think he'll kind of prove out to be, again, kind of similar to Pancada, maybe not back in that 2022 form, but somewhere in this like 3 to 5 range of Sentinel players, and I think he'll be really solid. Then Cortasia, who I know will work out, but I just have to see it first. He is unbelievable. I loved him in tier 2 as a smokes player. I watched him in that offseason tournament. He was unbelievable. Barring nerves for this guy, I'm going to have him as a top 3 Sentinel player in Americas, like after kickoff. So, I don't know. He's really, really good. I really like him. I love Cortasia. I've been on him for multiple months before people watched this offseason tournament and really liked him from that. So, yeah, he's one of my favorite players. Then Heat, a great player from the past couple of years, or I guess last year technically, playing the initiator for crew, swapping over to Sentinel now for Furia. I'm kind of surprised he didn't initially swap to this after his duelist play, because he's been really good at it for Furia. I'd like to see him continue to play this and play really well for them. Yeah, I don't know. I think he's gonna be good as well. I have probably more confidence that I guess I'm less scared that these last 3 will be terrible than Ye, but I think Ye has more potential than especially these last 2. If that makes sense. That's why I have Ye number 1 in this tier. Then Tui's just been a really solid smokes player for a couple years. I think he'll be really solid on the Sentinel role. Maybe even unlock a different like gear within him to kind of just take more duels, be a little bit more aggressive. I think he'll be pretty good at that. Then this last tier, you got IGLs and kind of not the greatest mechanical Sentinel players. I think Prize is definitely the best mechanical player in these bottom 4. But again, he just has to prove it. Net, I think, has proven that he's probably not good enough mechanically for tier 1. And then Boostio and FNS being IGLs. FNS is obviously the worst individual in Americas. If you disagree, you're wrong. I don't think anybody will, though. I think most people that are FNS fans do realize that he's not a good individual player. But yeah, Boostio I really like as well. So I think he can have some more of those pop-off performances. It just doesn't happen as much now on this 100 Thieves team. All right, now onto my last list here, which will be my IGL rankings. I think this top tier, I think most people would have these 4 in their top 4. Valen, John QT, FNS, and Boostio. I'm going to take the 2 guys that performed the best last year in Valen and John QT. I think Valen had better performances overall throughout the year in terms of if you rank every single event. Because, I mean, Sentinels just was not good in Stage 2. I don't think the calling was very good in Stage 2. They just weren't able to adapt. So, I don't know. I'm going to have Valen over John QT just because I trust him a little bit more long-term. I think John QT, again, is in this tier, and you could put him number 1, and I wouldn't disagree with you. I'm just going to put Valen ahead of John QT for now. Then FNS, I have number 3, with Boostio number 4. 2 guys that I think Boostio definitely had the better year last year. I think Boostio was, in terms of last year, was pretty clearly the 3rd best NAIGL. But I think FNS going into this year will kind of prove to be a little bit better than Boostio. And honestly, I think FNS will probably reclaim his throne as number 1. I just have to see it first. Then number 5 is pretty obviously King. He had a great year on Lev last year. Hopefully he continues that again on Lev this year. Nature, number 6, with Nazor, Mitch, Zap, Adverso, and Rafa all in the same tier. I think just a bunch of really solid IGLs here. Nobody that really is going to be too great. I think the guys with the most potential here are definitely Nazor and Zap. Being kind of, I would say, players that I know less about than maybe Nature, Mitch, and players like that. But I do really like those 2 guys. I think Adverso can kind of sneak into that conversation as well. Maybe their teams perform well, especially with Nazor and MIBR. They perform well and then get into those maybe higher tiers with King, I would say. I wouldn't say anybody's going to prove to be in this top tier of IGLs other than maybe King in 2025. But if they continue to stack good years on top of each other, maybe they will be into that tier within like 2026. I don't think I really have much else to say about this list, honestly. Vinny, number 12, I think pretty obviously. Tier 2 player coming in, a rookie that has never even IGL'd in Tier 2. I have my doubts about it. I think he can do it, but I just like to see it first. I guess I didn't really talk about Nature and Mitch. I think they're both just okay individual players that are good IGLs at best. But you can definitely do better than them. Like, I think even out of last year's players, you had Flya, who was pretty clearly better than both of them. So I don't know why these teams, I mean, I know probably why EG didn't, because they didn't want to spend the money. But like Cloud9, like just go get Flya. I don't know why you bothered even signing Rossi if you're just going to cut him. I've just been dogging on C9, the roster management this whole video. But I think they do deserve it. I think those 2 guys are solid. Nazor did really well at the end of last year. I'd just like to see him continue it. He's on a different team now, especially. He can prove that he is probably in this tier with King the fastest. Zap won Ascension. I think he played really well then. Just has to prove that he's over some of these guys. Adverso played really well in Ascension as well. Played really well in Tier 2. Has been a player that's been around since like 2022 with that Lev team. He can be really good. Rafa been on a bunch of solid Brazil Tier 2 teams. Hopefully last year was kind of a down year for him, and he'll get back to maybe where he was in 2023. And then obviously I talked about Vinny already. So I kind of went out of order with that one. But still, let me know what you guys think of these rankings in the comments below. I will zoom out now so you guys can look at all of the rankings. This is what I have for Americas. This will probably be my second video, but I am recording this one first. I will probably do EMEA before this. So stay tuned for my Pacific video. Go watch that EMEA video, or stay tuned for it depending on when I upload this. I have no idea. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.